And that is, there is something within our power that has a very profound effect on our life, on our psychological state, and on our spiritual state, and on our emotional state. And that is something called focus. Focus. And this is something I emphasize a lot, and I will emphasize again. What you focus on grows. So whatever you focus on in your life is going to actually start to grow. And when it grows, it starts to become bigger, and it also starts to surround you. Okay? So let me give you an example. There are some people, and their habit is that they focus on problems. Okay? And sometimes it's not for any bad intent, but it's because that's just the way they're designed. They are problem focused. And sometimes, ironically, it's because they're problem solvers. Do you guys understand what I mean? So some people are very problem solve. Their orientation is problem solving. Now, a problem solving orientation sometimes tends to then look for the problem in any situation so as to what? Solve it. These are the people who then you might later on say, oh, they're so critical. But the reality is they're looking for the problem so they can solve it. Do you guys understand what I mean? Now what happens with this, and this is a subtle issue, yeah, is that when you focus on problems in a situation, see, there's no situation that's ever going to be perfect, is there? Are you ever going to have a perfect situation in this life? No, it goes against the definition of dunya. Dunya, by definition, is imperfect. Everyone with me? So there's always going to be a problem. There's never going to be a perfect situation. So, but if you focus on the problem in every situation, here's what happens to it. It starts to look bigger than it is. And it will actually start to consume you. Everything that you talk about will be the problem. Everything that you think about will be that problem. Everything that maybe you post about will be about that problem. Everything you read about will be about that problem. Do you understand? And this actually becomes a pitfall that sometimes happens even to Islamic workers. So for example, an activist. An activist, mashallah, is working for a cause. And that's amazing work. But an activist has to also be careful because, for example, I'll give you an example. An activist who is fighting against Islamophobia, all right? So their work is extremely important, right? But if an activist who's fighting against Islamophobia only is reading about Islamophobia, only is talking about Islamophobia, only is posting about Islamophobia, only is discussing, you understand what happens? Do you know what happens to that person? It will start to affect them. And the reason it'll start to affect them is because everywhere they're looking, everywhere they're thinking, everywhere, it's actually the focal point is a problem. Because Islamophobia is a problem, right? And racism is, these are problems. But what happens is if that becomes the focal point, the only focal point in that person's life, it will actually start to affect their emotional, spiritual, and psychological state. Because what happens is, it will change the way you view the world. You'll notice, okay, put aside activism for 1 second. And let me re-emphasize, this is extremely important work. This isn't to say that this isn't something that's necessary. It is. But right now what I'm saying is something subtle.